This is Ron Sipsic bringing the third segment of our three-part series, Making the Case for Free Trade. The objective in this segment is to show how trade along the lines of comparative advantage can improve the outcomes of two producers, Greenthumb and Fivethumbs. We begin our analysis by looking at four assumptions. 1. We assume original resource costs. 2. Each producer uses 180 hours of labor. 3. Greenthumb needs 50 tomatoes, Fivethumbs needs 10 tomatoes. And 4. Trade occurs at 1 tomato equals 2 corn. This problem divides really into two parts. We will first of all look at no trade outcomes. We will see how each producer can do by being self-sufficient in producing both products. Then we will have each producer specialize in trade, and we will compare trade outcomes with no trade outcomes. So we begin the problem with the no trade scenario. Under the no trade scenario, each producer will have 180 hours of labor to make both corn and tomatoes. Greenthumb, having 180 hours of labor, can produce either corn or tomatoes or both. With 180 hours, Greenthumb can produce 90 units of corn. How so? Well, 180 hours divided by 2 hours, which is her cost of producing corn, leaves her with 90 units of corn. Or she could take the 180 hours and devote it to tomatoes. At 3 hours a tomato, she could make 60 tomatoes. So Greenthumb can produce 90 corn or 60 tomatoes or some combination in between. If we look at the relationship between 90C and 60T, we see that 1C equals 0.67 T. This should look familiar because this is the opportunity cost calculation. Remember, 0.67 T is the opportunity cost, Greenthumb's opportunity cost, when she produces C. And if we turn it around and solve for T, 1T equals 1.5 corn. So these numbers were developed in the second segment of our series, and we showed these when we were developing the idea of comparative advantage. Now we'll put Fivethumbs over here on the right. Notice that Fivethumbs also has 180 hours of resources. What can Fivethumbs do with the 180 hours of resources? Well, with 180 hours, he could devote that 180 hours to corn. At 6 hours per corn, Fivethumbs could produce 30 corn. If the 180 hours are devoted to tomatoes, at 12 hours per tomato, Fivethumbs could produce 12 tomatoes. So it's 30 corn or 12 tomatoes or some combination in between. Again, we see these internal exchange rates or opportunity costs. 1C equals 0.40 T, or 1T equals 2.5 C. As we illustrated in segment 2, change the color here and illustrate this. In segment 2, we showed that Fivethumbs has the comparative advantage in corn. Why? Fivethumbs is able to produce corn at the lower opportunity cost. Well, Greenthumb has the comparative advantage in tomatoes. Why? Because she's able to produce tomatoes at the lower opportunity cost. Now, comparative advantage has no application in the no trade segment. After all, they're not trading. And if they're not trading along the lines of their comparative advantage. Now, let us recall that Greenthumb needs 50 tomatoes. Fivethumbs needs 10 tomatoes. So every time Every time Green Thumb makes a tomato, she gives up 1.5 corn in her garden. So 50 tomatoes times 1.5 corn equals 75 corn. This is given up. So to make those 50 tomatoes, 75 corn must be given up. 90 corn is possible in her garden with 180 hours, but she gives up 75 corn to make 50 tomatoes, leaving her with 15 corn. So 15 corn is what she is able to produce. So when all is said and done, what does Green Thumb have? Being the self-sufficient gardener that she is, she ends up with 50 tomatoes and 15 corn. Now, let's do the same analysis for Five-Thumb. Let me create a break here so we can keep the numbers separate. Five-Thumb needs 10 tomatoes. Every tomato is going to cost him in his own garden 2.5 corn. We see that up here. 1 tomato equals 2.5 corn. So 10 times 2.5 corn is 25 corn. Five-Thumb has capacity to produce 30 corn, but gives up 25 corn in the process of producing tomatoes, ending up with 5 corn. So 25 corn is given up. Given up for what purpose? To make the 10 tomatoes. 5 corn is what Five-Thumb actually can produce. So when all is said and done, how does self-sufficient, no-trade Five-Thumb end up? 10 tomatoes, 5 corn. Again, we can see that Five-Thumb is the poor producer. Green Thumb, because of her efficiencies with respect to labor, her ability to use less labor to make the same product, she can produce more output from the same hours of resources. Five-Thumb, on the other hand, being relatively inefficient in both tomatoes and corn, cannot make as much product from 180 hours of labor. So that is our benchmark. That's what happens without trade. Now, let's do the trade part of the problem, number 2. This will go relatively quickly because we've done some of the calculations already. Green Thumb, as we said earlier, has 180 hours of labor. With 180 hours of labor devoted to what? Tomatoes. Why tomatoes? That's what she has the comparative advantage in. She can make 60 tomatoes. This is what she contributes. So she's going to take her whole garden, she's going to specialize in tomatoes. Five-Thumbs, on the other hand, will specialize in corn. Why? Because he has the comparative advantage. So with 180 hours, what can he do? Divide 180 hours by 6 hours. It takes 6 hours for him to make a corn. He can make 30 corn. So Five-Thumb makes 30 corn, devotes his whole garden to that. Green Thumb makes 60 tomatoes. She devotes her whole garden to that, and then they're in a position to trade. Now, how does the trading take place? Green Thumb is going to make 60 tomatoes and keep 50 tomatoes. Why? Because 50 tomatoes is her need. She is going to trade away 10 tomatoes to her trading partner, Five-Thumb. Notice that 10 tomatoes is exactly what Five-Thumb needs. So the problem has been worked out so one of the producers can meet exactly the two producers' needs. Five-Thumb will turn around and trade corn for those tomatoes. Now, how much corn is going to be traded? Well, let's remember that 1 tomato equals 2 corn if trade takes place. This is the given exchange rate. So for every tomato that flows this way, 2 corn must flow back this way. So 20 corn is paid for the 10 tomatoes, leaving Five-Thumb with 10 corn. Now, let's summarize. Green Thumb, by trading, gets her 50 tomatoes and gets 20 corn. Five Thumb, by trading, gets his 10 tomatoes and gets 10 corn. Notice that Greenthumb is 5 corn better off by trading. Notice that Five Thumbs is also 5 corn better off by trading. Now there's a reason why the gain from trade was divided equally. This exchange rate, 1T equals 2C, falls exactly in the middle of the trading zone. We talked about the trading zone in our segment 2. Now, remember, the maximum price was 1T equals 2.5C. The minimum price was 1T equals 1.5C. And this price falls right in the middle of that interval, right in the middle of that zone. So the gains from trade are divided equally. Now, let's illustrate how trade impacted these two parties. First of all, we'll draw a picture for Greenthumb, and then we'll draw a picture for Five Thumb. And let's try to draw a straight line. That is not the look we were going for. So let me use my fancy smancy eraser, and I will erase that very poor. Let me use a more powerful eraser, and whoa, too powerful, and we will actually redraw this. Go back to my pen and get that out of the way, and we are back in business. Alright, so vertical axis, horizontal axis, this is plus 5C. Now, my objective here is to draw a straight line. What did you think about that? And then my objective here is to also draw a relatively straight line. Not bad. Okay, these are called production possibility curves. A production possibility curve is, in this case, that it's not. The curve would suggest it's nonlinear, but these curves are actually straight lines. So these are linear curves. In economics, we say such silly things. And what is a production possibility curve? It gives all of the combinations of two products that can be produced with a fixed amount of resources. So if Greenthumb puts all resources into T, she can produce 60. If she puts all resources into C, she can produce 90. If, this is Greenthumb, if Five Thumb puts all resources into T, he can make 12. Now I know these are not drawn to scale, but I was pretty excited to get a straight line here, so let's go with it. And then if all resources are put into C, he can get 30. Okay? So these are the endpoints, and we identified those in the no trade part of the problem. Now, we said, let me choose a different color here. We said that under no trade conditions, where they're just each producer is trying to be self-sufficient, they would produce both products. Greenthumb would produce 50 tomatoes and 15 corn. We said that that is the no trade outcome. Five Thumb, on the other hand, would produce 10 tomatoes and 5 corn. That is Five Thumb's no trade outcome. However, when they traded, what happened? They moved out beyond this line. They actually moved out to a point out here. We'll call that the trade outcome. 50 tomatoes, 20 corn. In other words, Greenthumb was able to escape the limitations of her production possibility curve. She was able to improve her choices by trading. And it looked at the beginning of this problem like she would have no reason to cooperate with Five Thumb. And look, she's better off by working with this other gardener. Five Thumb, on the other hand, goes from 10 tomatoes and 5 corn out to 10 tomatoes and 10 corn. He too escapes the limitations of his production possibility curve. his choices are improved in a world of scarcity. Notice here that the rich got richer and the poor got richer. This story has a happy ending. And we could also say that there's a moral to this story, that self-sufficiency is a road to poverty, but cooperation, trade, is a road to greater prosperity.